In this video, we'll talk about the third section of your final paper, the methodology section. This is often one of my favorite sections to write because it's really straightforward. In all of these videos, I've talked about sort of the overarching questions you're trying to answer with each section, whether it's in the introduction, giving a background on your topic, talking about sort of the national condition with what you're studying, whether there's anything interesting, and making the paper relevant. The literature review, you're answering what have other scholars done on this subject. With methodology, what you're trying to answer for your reader is, what is your research question? You're restating that. What is your data? What is your analysis? And so we can start right off the bat for my paper. And I might use a really clear sentence like, in this paper, I analyze predictors for the level of health insurance at the county level across the United States. That's not the most poetic sentence ever, but it's clear. It tells the reader exactly what I'm doing. And I want to keep reiterating what they should expect when they're reading the paper. Where the data comes from, in sort of the literal sense, the data comes from your professor. But I describe in the final paper description where the data comes from, so you can talk a little bit about where the data came from. So in this paper, I analyze health insurance rates. To answer that question, I use data from the National Historical Geographic Information System, right? That is right here. I'm using data from this. I don't use COVID cases in my study. I don't use election data. And so all of my data is coming from the National Historical, the NHGIS, 2009, 2,901 counties. And so that's an overview of where my data came from. I could also add the year that data came from, which is 2018. From 2018, so that's where the data came from. It's sort of the higher level. What is my data more specifically? For my dependent variable, I use the percentage of all individuals that did not have any form of health insurance. And you can get that directly out of this document, right? I describe what the variables are. You could pull this almost word for word. The percentage of residents that have no health insurance. To start a new bullet, to analyze that, I use 3 independent variables. For my first and I'm going to have to remind myself on this, I use poverty, nonprofit percent, and I'm going to have to look back, college. Is the percentage of residents that are in poverty. Right, and I can pull a lot of this directly out of the extra credit assignment I did. I'm actually going to copy this down. Right, don't be afraid to sort of reuse things when it's applicable. because people in poverty don't have means to afford insurance, so it should positively predict uninsured rates. I already did that assignment, and I'm already writing part of my final paper. My second independent variable is the percentage of the workforce employed by nonprofit organizations. And I can again use this sentence. Nonprofits may provide health insurance and other opportunities to residents, so it should predict lower uninsured rates. And so I'm both telling the reader what variables I'm using and why. Why am I putting these in? My final independent variable is the percentage of residents that graduated college or above. College graduates tend to have better jobs that may provide health insurance. And so I want to be clear here. So it should negatively predict uninsured rates. What is my analysis? I will use those variables in a regression. Done. I want to add a few more details though about my variables so that people can fully sort of understand them. So I want to add summary statistics. We talked about summary statistics is a good way to give people an overview of your data. And I also want to add a graph, at least for my dependent variable. So I've pulled up R here. I need to read it in the data again. And so I need to copy this line. On that. And I got that. 2,910. Okay. So I'm going to do summary statistics for these variables. Of course, we've gone over that in the descriptive statistics chapter of the textbook. You can look back on that for more details, but I'll do it quickly here. And so I'm going to create a subset of my data so that it's just the variables I want. I want to make sure I get the names right, of course. No insurance percent. I'm going to copy that. POV percent. College percent. Actually, keeping things in order that I do, nonprofit percent. I think. Okay. So I've now got 4 variables in my data, and I can do a summary of them. And those are the summary statistics, and I can copy this. I can go ahead and just copy this into my paper. One note that's a little bit annoying about R is that the font is by default Courier. And so it looks, the decimals are out of line. It looks a little funky here. It doesn't look quite as good. So if I change the font to Courier at the top, it looks a little bit better. Those are sort of the finer details. I'm not requiring that of anyone. And so when I put summary statistics in my paper, I want to reference them. I don't just want to sort of leave them without talking about them. And so I'll go back and I'll say, as shown in the summary statistics below, 9.6 of people not have health insurance in the data. Right, I want to reference either the mean or maybe the max, or sort of what is interesting about these summaries. I might go back and say in the data 15.5% of residents were in poverty. In all, 7.3% of people worked for nonprofits. 0.78% of residents graduated from college or above. Great. So now I want to add a graph for at least my dependent variable. And there's a few different ways you could do this. So most of the data is continuous variables, and this goes back to the chapter on graphing. What do we want to do with a continuous variable? If you want to just graph it or graph the four variables individually, you can do a histogram. So I could add a histogram. And this is not adding any sort of the bells and whistles of changing the color to something and making right. This is not sort of a finished version of the graph, right? I would continue to sort of tinker with it, but I can at least have that. I could show the individual relationship between my variables, my independent variables, and my dependent variables. So I could do a scatter plot for it, and I could do a scatter plot for all four of the variable or all three of the variables. I want no insurance on the y-axis for all of them, but I could go and do one for college and nonprofit. And this is useful because it begins to show the relationship. I can see that there is a positive relationship. As poverty increases, the percentage of people without health insurance increase. So as college increases, the percentage without health insurance decreases. So I can start to see those relationships. So I could use this as my graph for the data. I could use just the histogram. It's up to me. So I can copy if I want to export the plot, what I did is I went copy to clipboard, I copied it, and then I can bring that into my paper. And that's the methodology section, right? What we're trying to do is get the reader ready for what's about to happen. It's almost like providing them a detailed menu. That if you go to a restaurant and you get a detailed description of the dish, that it's steak cooked in a certain way with potatoes on the side and a certain au jus on top and all these things, so that when the food is brought to their table, they know exactly what to expect. It isn't a mystery. This is us telling the reader exactly what they're about to be served. And then the next section is where we actually serve the dish.